The detention facility on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual sounds of alien species being processed. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez had seen it all during his 15 years manning the intake desk. Drunk Zephyrians with their crystal blue skin, violent Krex warriors still bleeding green ichor from their latest bar fights, and smooth-talking Velen smugglers trying to bribe their way out with exotic currencies. But today felt different. The woman standing before his desk didn't fit any pattern he recognized. She was human, which was rare enough this far out in the Outer Rim territories. Her dark skin bore the telltale signs of someone who'd spent years under alien suns, weathered and tough. Her clothes were standard dock worker gear, nothing fancy, but clean despite whatever trouble had brought her here. What caught Rodriguez's attention wasn't her appearance, though. It was her posture. Most humans in lockup slouched, fidgeted, or tried to look tough. This woman stood perfectly straight, hands clasped behind her back, eyes forward but somehow seeing everything. Military bearing. Rodriguez had spent enough time around career soldiers to recognize the stance. "Name," Rodriguez said, pulling up the booking interface on his tablet. "Keiko Washington." Her voice was steady, no tremor of fear or anger. Most people brought to detention either raged against the injustice or begged for mercy. Washington did neither. Rodriguez scrolled through the arrest report. Public disturbance, resisting arrest, assault on a station security officer. The usual charges they slapped on anyone who fought back during an arrest. But the details were interesting. According to the arresting officer's notes, Washington had been working maintenance in the lower docking bays when a group of hegemony officials arrived for an unscheduled inspection. The hegemony. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. The alliance of alien species that controlled most of this sector treated humans like second-class citizens at best. Their inspections usually meant someone was about to lose their job, their home, or worse. "Says here you attacked Inspector Vexhari when he tried to confiscate your work equipment." Washington's expression didn't change. "I defended my tools from theft." "Your tools?" "My maintenance kit, bought and paid for with my own credits. Inspector claimed it was station property and tried to take it." Rodriguez had seen this before. Hegemony officials loved to find excuses to confiscate human belongings, especially anything that might be valuable or useful. They'd claim violations of some obscure regulation and pocket whatever they seized. He glanced at the arrest photos. Inspector Vexahari, a tall reptilian Sauron, had what looked like a broken nose ridge and his uniform was torn. The other photos showed Washington's confiscated belongings spread across a security table. Her maintenance kit was impressive. Professional-grade tools, well-maintained, expensive. Worth more than most dock workers made in 6 months. How does a maintenance worker afford gear like this? For the first time, Washington's perfect composure cracked slightly. Something flickered in her eyes. There and gone so fast, Rodriguez almost missed it. Memory, pain, loss. Inheritance. Rodriguez nodded and continued processing the paperwork. Standard procedure called for confiscated personal effects to be cataloged and stored until release or trial. He pulled up the inventory list and started reading items aloud as he entered them into the system. Multi-phase scanner, quantum wrench set, plasma torch, neural interface adapter. He paused. Molecular restructuring device? That last item made him look up. Molecular restructuring devices were military hardware, classified technology that could break down matter at the atomic level and rebuild it into something else. Civilians weren't supposed to have access to them. "That's a family heirloom," Washington said quietly. Rodriguez stared at her. Family heirloom. Right. He'd heard that one before. Usually from smugglers trying to explain why they had banned weapons or restricted technology, but something in Washington's tone made him hesitate before calling her a liar. "I'll need to verify the registration on that device. Serial number is HC7749 Delta Whiskey," The designation meant nothing to Rodriguez, but he dutifully entered it into the system. While the computer searched, he continued with the personal effects inventory. One mop, he almost laughed. Among all the expensive high-tech equipment, Washington carried a simple cleaning mop. It looked ancient, the wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands, the synthetic fibers frayed but still functional. Sentimental value? Rodriguez asked, genuinely curious now. Washington's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. You could say that. Rodriguez was about to move on when something caught his eye. Washington had rolled up her sleeves while he worked, revealing her forearms. Her right arm bore a collection of scars, the kind that came from working with dangerous machinery or weapons. But it was her left arm that made him stop breathing. Coiled around her forearm in intricate black ink was a viper. Not just any viper, but a specific design Rodriguez recognized from his military days. The snake's body formed a perfect spiral, its fangs dripping stylized venom that transformed into circuit patterns as they fell. At the base of the tattoo, partially hidden by her sleeve, Rodriguez could make out the edge of something else. Numbers, letters. He knew that tattoo. Every soldier in the Terran Defense Corps knew that tattoo. The Black Viper insignia belonged to the Ghost Battalion, the most classified military unit in human space. They were legends, whispered about in bars where old soldiers gathered to tell war stories. Officially, the Ghost Battalion didn't exist. Unofficially, they were the reason humanity still had a presence in the Outer Rim. Rodriguez's hands trembled slightly as he set down the tablet. If Washington was Ghost Battalion, she wasn't just some dock worker caught up in a random inspection. She was one of the most dangerous humans alive, and probably one of the most wanted. The computer chimed softly, indicating the search results were ready. Rodriguez glanced at the screen and felt his blood turn to ice water. The molecular restructuring device was registered to Colonel Marcus Washington, Terran Defense Corps, Ghost Battalion. Status: killed in action, Battle of Zerion Prime 3 years ago. Rodriguez looked up at the woman standing before him. Washington. Colonel Washington's daughter, maybe? Sister? Or maybe... Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly, I'm going to need you to extend your left arm. Washington hesitated for just a moment, then slowly pushed back her sleeve. The full tattoo was revealed in all its terrible glory. The black viper coiled around her arm, and beneath it, etched in small but clear letters, was her service number and rank. Colonel Keiko Washington, Ghost Battalion, the Phantom of Zerion Prime. The woman who had single-handedly held the evacuation zone while 3,000 civilians escaped the hegemony assault. The woman who was supposed to be dead. Rodriguez stared at the most decorated soldier in human history. Currently standing in his detention facility, wearing dockworker coveralls and carrying a mop, the implications hit him like a freight shuttle. If Colonel Washington was alive, if she was here, then something big was happening. Something that could change the balance of power in the entire sector. He looked at the mop again, really looked at it this time. The wooden handle was worn smooth, but not from cleaning floors. It was worn in specific places, the exact spots where hands would grip a weapon during combat. And the synthetic fibers weren't random. They formed a pattern, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. It was a message, a signal. The mop was how other Ghost Battalion operatives would recognize her. Rodriguez realized he was holding his breath. He forced himself to continue the inventory process. But his mind was racing. What was Colonel Washington doing here? Why was she pretending to be a maintenance worker? And what did her presence mean for the upcoming Hegemony Summit that was scheduled to take place on Kepler Station in just 3 days? As he processed the last of her belongings, Rodriguez made a decision that would either save humanity's foothold in the Outer Rim or get him court-martialed for treason. Instead of flagging Colonel Washington's true identity in the system, He entered her as exactly what she appeared to be: a dock worker named Keiko Washington, arrested for defending her property. But he also did something else. He activated a hidden subroutine in the detention system, one that only a few trusted humans knew about. It would send a coded message to the Terran Defense Corps, letting them know that Ghost Battalion was active on Kepler Station. Whatever Colonel Washington was planning, Rodriguez had just given her the time and cover she needed to do it. The detention cell was a 6x8 box of reinforced polymer, designed to hold everything from drunk minors to dangerous criminals. Colonel Keiko Washington sat on the narrow bench, her back straight against the wall, and waited. She'd been waiting for 3 years. 3 years since Xerion Prime, when the hegemony's surprise attack had caught the human colony completely off guard. 3 years since she'd held the spaceport with nothing but a squad of Marines and a handful of civilian volunteers, while the evacuation ships loaded refugees. 3 years since the orbital bombardment had turned the entire settlement into a crater of molten glass. Officially, Colonel Keiko Washington had died in that bombardment. Unofficially, she'd been pulled from the rubble by a Ghost Battalion extraction team and spent 18 months in a medical facility rebuilding her shattered body. The scars on her right arm weren't from maintenance work. They were from the plasma burns that had nearly killed her. But that was all classified, buried so deep in Terran Defense Corps files that only a handful of people knew the truth. As far as the galaxy was concerned, the Phantom of Xerion Prime was dead, and that's exactly how TDC wanted it. Dead heroes couldn't interfere with politics. Dead heroes couldn't ask uncomfortable questions about why the hegemony had known exactly when and where to attack. Dead heroes couldn't investigate the possibility that someone in the human government had sold out 3,000 civilians for a favorable trade agreement. Keiko had spent the last year and a half tracking down leads, following paper trails, and slowly working her way up the chain of corruption that had led to Xerion Prime. The trail had brought her here, to Kepler Station, where the next phase of the hegemony's expansion plan was about to unfold. In 2 days, the sector's most powerful alien leaders would gather for a summit to discuss the human problem. The official agenda included discussions about trade regulations, territorial boundaries, and immigration policies. The unofficial agenda was simple: decide how to carve up human space once humanity was no longer strong enough to defend it. Keiko's mission was equally simple: stop them. The cell door's energy field shimmered and deactivated. A young human guard stepped inside, nervous sweat beading on his forehead, despite the station's climate controls. "Ma'am, you have a visitor." Keiko raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected anyone to know she was here, at least not this quickly. Her cover identity was solid, backed by years of carefully constructed records, showing Keiko Washington as nothing more than a drifter who picked up maintenance work wherever she could find it. The guard led her through the detention facility's corridors to a small interview room. Sitting at the metal table inside was Sergeant Rodriguez, the man who had processed her intake. He looked like he hadn't slept, his uniform rumpled and his eyes red-rimmed. "Have a seat, Ms. Washington." Keiko settled into the chair across from him, maintaining her dock worker persona. Rodriguez waited until the guard left and the door sealed before speaking again. "I know who you are." 5 words that could destroy 3 years of careful planning. Keiko kept her expression neutral, giving nothing away. "I'm a maintenance worker who got arrested for defending my property. You're Colonel Keiko Washington, Ghost Battalion, the Phantom of Xerion Prime." Keiko studied Rodriguez carefully. Mid-40s, career military bearing, the kind of steady competence that came from years of reliable service. His uniform bore the insignia of a Terran Defense Corps liaison, which meant he was one of the few humans on the station with access to classified information. "Colonel Washington is dead. The reports of your death were greatly exaggerated." Rodriguez leaned forward. "The question is, what are you doing here?" For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the station's life support systems. Keiko weighed her options. She could maintain her cover, but Rodriguez had already seen through it. She could try to silence him, but killing a TDC sergeant would create complications she couldn't afford. Or she could take a calculated risk. What makes you think I'm anyone other than what my arrest record says? Rodriguez reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data pad. Because 30 minutes after I logged your molecular restructuring device into evidence, I got a priority message from TDC Command. Seems they're very interested in anything connected to Colonel Marcus Washington. Colonel Marcus Washington, her father, the man who had given her the tools, the training, and the moral foundation that had shaped her into the soldier she became. The man who had died believing his daughter would carry on his mission to protect humanity from those who would destroy it. My father was a good soldier. Your father was a legend, and according to his service record, so were you, until Zerion Prime. Rodriguez activated the data pad, and a holographic display materialized above the table. It showed a tactical map of Zerion Prime during the final battle, with red markers indicating hegemony positions and blue markers showing human defensive lines. I've studied the battle reports, the official ones and the classified ones. You held position for 16 hours against impossible odds. Your squad took 90% casualties, but you never gave ground. 3,000 civilians escaped because you refused to break. Keiko watched the tactical display replay the battle she'd lived through. The markers moved across the map in a dance of strategy and sacrifice, showing how her small force had used every trick, every advantage, every desperate gambit to buy time for the evacuation. The reports also say you died when the hegemony bombardment hit your position. Maybe I did. Rodriguez shut off the display. Dead women don't infiltrate space stations. Dead women don't carry molecular restructuring devices registered to their fathers, and dead women definitely don't get visits from TDC intelligence officers. That last statement hit Keiko like a shock rod. What TDC intelligence officers? Commander Sarah Chen arrived on the station 6 hours ago. She's been asking very specific questions about recent arrests, particularly any involving humans with military backgrounds. Keiko's blood turned to ice. Sarah Chen was TDC intelligence, but she was also one of the people Keiko suspected of being involved in the Zerion Prime conspiracy. If Chen was here, it meant someone had blown Keiko's cover from the inside. Where is Commander Chen now? Conference Room 7, Level 12. She's meeting with Station Administrator Velk Tar about security arrangements for the summit. Keiko stood up abruptly. I need to get out of here now. Rodriguez didn't move. Before you go anywhere, I need to know what you're planning. This station has 40,000 residents, including 8,000 humans. If you're here to start a war, I'm here to prevent one. Keiko made her decision. Rodriguez had already figured out most of the truth, and she needed allies more than she needed secrecy. In 36 hours, the Hegemony Summit will approve a resolution authorizing military action against human colonies that refuse to accept alien oversight. They have a list of 12 worlds, starting with New Terra. 2 million humans will be dead within a month unless someone stops this. Rodriguez stared at her. How do you know this? Because I've spent 2 years tracking the conspiracy that led to Zerion Prime. The same people who sold out my colony are now selling out humanity's future. And Commander Chen is one of them. That's a serious accusation. It's about to become a serious problem. Keiko moved toward the door. Chen's presence here means my cover is blown, which means I have less than 6 hours to complete my mission before this place becomes a war zone. What mission? Keiko paused at the door. The molecular restructuring device in my toolkit isn't just a maintenance tool. It's been modified to interface with station systems. Give me access to the main computer core, and I can upload a virus that will broadcast the summit's classified discussions to every news network in human space. When people see what the hegemony really thinks of us, they'll stop believing we can coexist peacefully. And if you can't reach the computer core? Keiko's expression hardened. Then I implement Plan B. The device can also overload the station's fusion reactors. If the hegemony wants to plan humanity's destruction, they can do it from whatever's left after the explosion. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he stood up and moved to the door control panel. Prisoner attempted to assault guard during interview, had to be returned to cell immediately. He input the false report into his datapad, creating a paper trail that would explain why the interview had ended abruptly. Then he looked at Keiko. The computer core is on level 35, section Gamma. Security checkpoint every 5 levels, but I can get you maintenance clearance for most of them. Why are you helping me? Because I was at New Terra when I was a kid. My family was part of the first wave of colonists. If what you're saying is true, if they're planning to attack civilian populations, Rodriguez's voice trailed off. Some things are worth the risk, Keiko nodded. I'll need my equipment back. Already taken care of. Your toolkit is in maintenance locker 47 level 8. The mop too. Despite everything, Keiko almost smiled. The mop is important. I figured. The handle unscrews, doesn't it? Concealed weapon? Concealed communicator. If other Ghost Battalion operatives are on the station, they'll be monitoring the frequency. Rodriguez opened the cell door. How many other Ghost Battalion operatives are we talking about? I don't know. Ghost Battalion cells operate independently, but if TDC Command sent Chen to investigate, they might have sent a cleanup team too. They stepped into the corridor, and Rodriguez led her toward the security checkpoint. As they walked, Keiko couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out faster than she'd anticipated. Chen's presence changed everything. What had been a covert operation was about to become a running battle through the corridors of Kepler Station. The only question was whether humanity would survive the aftermath. The maintenance tunnels of Kepler Station were a maze of pipes, conduits, and service corridors that most people forgot existed. Perfect for moving unseen through 35 levels of alien bureaucracy and human desperation. Keiko crawled through a ventilation shaft, her toolkit strapped to her back and the ancient mop secured to her belt. Rodriguez had been good to his word. The maintenance clearances he'd provided got her past the first 3 security checkpoints without question. After that, she'd gone underground, literally. Her wrist communicator buzzed softly. She'd reassembled it from components hidden in the mop handle, just as Rodriguez had guessed. 3 short pulses, followed by 2 long ones. Ghost Battalion code. Someone else was on the station. Keiko paused at the next junction and activated the communicator's reply function. 4 short pulses. Her own call sign, the one she'd used before Xerion Prime when she still officially existed. The response came immediately. 7 short pulses. Keiko's blood froze. 7 pulses was the call sign for Major David Park, her former second-in-command, the man who had been standing next to her when the orbital bombardment hit. The man who should have been as dead as she was supposed to be. Either David had survived Xerion Prime, or someone else had his communicator. She changed course, following the signal toward level 28, the engineering section. If David was really alive, he'd head for the power distribution center. It was tactically defensible and gave access to every major system on the station. The ventilation shaft ended at a maintenance hatch. Keiko listened carefully before opening it, checking for voices or movement in the corridor beyond. Nothing. She slipped out of the shaft and found herself in a service corridor lined with power conduits and data cables. The communicator pulsed again. 7 shorts. Very close now. Keiko drew her sidearm, a compact plasma pistol concealed in her toolkit, and moved toward the engineering section. The corridors here were dimmer, lit only by emergency strips that cast everything in a red glow. Most of the station's residents avoided this area unless their jobs required it. She found David Park in the power distribution center, exactly where she'd expected him to be. He was standing with his back to her, studying a holographic display of the station's electrical grid. He looked older, his dark hair streaked with gray that hadn't been there 3 years ago. His left arm hung at an odd angle, probably damaged in the same bombardment that had supposedly killed them both. "Hello, Keiko." He didn't turn around, but somehow he knew she was there. Ghost battalion training. You learned to sense when someone was watching you, or you didn't survive long enough for it to matter. "Hello, David. You're supposed to be dead." "So are you." Finally, he turned to face her. The left side of his face was scarred. Plasma burns that had healed badly. His left eye was artificial, the synthetic iris a slightly different shade of brown than his natural right eye. "You look like hell," Keiko said. "You look like a janitor." Despite everything, despite the years of believing her closest friend was dead, Keiko smiled. David had always been able to make her laugh, even in the middle of the worst situations. "How long have you been on the station?" 2 weeks. I've been tracking the same conspiracy you have. The trail led here." David gestured at the holographic display. "The Hegemony Summit isn't just about policy decisions. They're planning something bigger." "I know. Military action against human colonies." "More than that." David manipulated the display, showing a schematic of Kepler Station's communication array. "They're going to use the station's broadcasting equipment to send an ultimatum to every human world simultaneously, accept hegemony oversight or face orbital bombardment." Keiko studied the schematic. The station's communication array was powerful enough to reach every corner of human space instantly. An ultimatum broadcast from here would reach 2 billion humans within minutes. "When?" "Tomorrow, during the closing ceremony of the summit. While the media is focused on the diplomatic pageantry, they'll deliver humanity's death sentence." "Not if I upload the virus first. Once the galaxy sees what they're really planning." "The virus won't work." David called up another display, this one showing the station's computer security protocols. They'd been completely overhauled in the last week, with new encryption algorithms and isolation procedures that would prevent any external program from accessing core systems. "Someone's been very thorough about closing the security holes you were planning to exploit." "Someone like Commander Chen?" David nodded grimly. "Chen arrived 2 days ago with a team of TDC technicians. Officially, they're here to upgrade the station's human-operated systems for better compatibility with alien networks. Unofficially, they're making sure no one can interfere with the broadcast." Keiko holstered her weapon. The situation was worse than she'd feared. Chen wasn't just covering up the conspiracy. She was actively facilitating it. "What about Plan B? Can we still overload the reactors?" "The fusion cores are isolated from external access. You'd need to physically plant charges in the reactor chamber itself." "That's a suicide mission." "Yes." David's artificial eye whirred softly as it focused on her. "Unless we can find another way." Keiko stared at the holographic displays, her mind racing through possibilities. Every plan she'd developed over the last 2 years assumed she could access the station's computer core or its power grid. With both options eliminated, she was left with nothing but increasingly desperate alternatives. "There is one possibility." David highlighted a section of the station schematic, showing the diplomatic conference center where the summit was being held. "The hegemony leaders will all be in one place tomorrow for the closing ceremony. If we can't stop the broadcast, we can stop the broadcasters." "You're talking about assassination." "I'm talking about preventing genocide." Keiko considered it. Taking out the hegemony leadership would certainly disrupt their plans, but it would also make humanity look like aggressors. It would give the aliens the excuse they needed to launch immediate military action against human worlds. "That's not a solution, David. That's starting a war we can't win. We're already in a war. We just haven't been fighting back." The passion in his voice reminded Keiko of the old David, the one who'd stood beside her on Zerion Prime and refused to retreat even when the odds became impossible. But there was something else there now, something darker. "What happened to you after the bombardment?" David was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat, emotionless. "I was captured. The hegemony spent 18 months interrogating me in one of their black sites. They wanted information about Ghost Battalion operations, human military capabilities, colony defense plans. When I wouldn't talk, they got creative." He gestured at his scarred face, his damaged arm. "I escaped eventually, but not before I learned some interesting things about my captors. Did you know that the hegemony considers humans to be an evolutionary mistake? A species that developed technology before developing wisdom? They see us as a threat that needs to be eliminated before we spread beyond our current territories." "David, the summit isn't about controlling human expansion, Keiko. It's about human extinction. They're planning to sterilize every human world, one by one, until we're nothing but a footnote in galactic history." The hatred in his voice was toxic, corrosive. Keiko recognized it because she'd felt it herself in the months after Zerion Prime. The rage that came from seeing everything you'd fought to protect destroyed by people who considered you less than sentient. Even if that's true, assassination isn't the answer. Then what is? Before Keiko could respond, her communicator buzzed again. 3 long pulses, followed by 3 short ones. Emergency evacuation signal. David checked his own communicator. "Station security is conducting a sweep of the engineering levels. Someone must have reported unusual activity." "Chen?" "Probably. We need to move." They gathered their equipment quickly and headed for the nearest emergency access shaft. As they climbed toward the upper levels, Keiko's mind kept returning to David's words. Human extinction. Was that really what the hegemony was planning? And if so, what could 2 supposedly dead soldiers do to stop it? They emerged from the access shaft on level 32, 3 levels below the computer core. The corridors here were busier, filled with alien technicians and human staff preparing for tomorrow's summit ceremonies. Keiko pulled up her hood and tried to blend in with the maintenance workers. "There," David pointed to a service elevator. "We can take that up to level 35. As they approached the elevator, Keiko noticed a familiar figure standing near the security checkpoint. Commander Sarah Chen, in full TDC dress uniform, was speaking with a group of station security officers. She was showing them something on a data pad, probably surveillance images. "She's looking for us." "Then we give her what she's looking for." David reached into his toolkit and pulled out what looked like a standard maintenance scanner, but Keiko recognized the modifications. It was a military-grade jamming device, capable of disrupting communication signals and sensor networks within a 50-meter radius. "David, no. If you activate that thing in a crowded corridor, the chaos will give us cover to reach the computer core. It will also cause a station-wide security alert. Every guard in this sector will converge on our position." David looked at her with his mismatched eyes, one natural, one artificial. Sometimes the direct approach is the only approach. Before Keiko could stop him, he activated the jamming device. Every electronic system within 50 meters immediately went haywire. Lights flickered, door controls malfunctioned, and security scanners began emitting warning tones. In the confusion, David sprinted toward the elevator. Keiko cursed and followed him. Around them, aliens and humans alike stumbled in the sudden darkness, trying to understand what had gone wrong. Security officers shouted orders in multiple languages, adding to the chaos. They reached the elevator just as the emergency lighting kicked in. David slammed his palm against the call button, but nothing happened. The power disruption had knocked out the elevator controls. "Stairs," Keiko pointed to an emergency stairwell. They ran up 3 flights of stairs while behind them, the security alert spread throughout the station. By the time they reached level 35, Klaxons were sounding and automated voices were announcing a security lockdown in multiple languages. The computer core was just ahead, behind a massive reinforced door marked with warning signs in 12 different alien scripts. David approached the door's control panel and began connecting devices from his toolkit. "This will take about 5 minutes to crack." "We don't have 5 minutes." Footsteps echoed in the stairwell below them. Heavy boots, multiple sets, moving fast. Station security was closing in. Keiko made a decision that surprised even her. She walked over to the control panel and placed her palm on the biometric scanner. The door opened immediately. David stared at her in shock. "How did you—" "Because I'm not here to stop the summit," Keiko said quietly. "I'm here to take control of it." The truth hit David like a physical blow. "You're working with them." "I'm working for humanity's survival, and that means making deals with people I don't trust to prevent outcomes I can't accept." Behind them, the security team reached the top of the stairs. Keiko stepped into the computer core chamber, which hummed with the power of quantum processors and data storage matrices that controlled everything from life support to navigation. "The virus I've been planning to upload, it's not designed to broadcast the summit proceedings. It's designed to take control of the station's communication array. Tomorrow, when the hegemony sends their ultimatum to human worlds, I'm going to override their message with one of my own." She moved to the main console and began connecting her molecular restructuring device to the core interface. "What message?" "The coordinates of every hegemony military installation, supply depot, and command center in this sector. Intelligence I've been gathering for 3 years. If they want to start a war with humanity, they'll discover that dead heroes make very effective spies." David raised his weapon, pointing it at Keiko's back. "You betrayed us. You betrayed Zerion Prime." "I saved Zerion Prime." Keiko didn't turn around, but continued working at the console. "The 3,000 civilians who escaped, they're alive because I made a deal. I gave the hegemony what they wanted, the death of Colonel Keiko Washington, in exchange for safe passage for the evacuation ships. You faked your own death. I became something more useful than a decorated war hero. I became a ghost that could walk among the enemy and learn their secrets." The upload was nearly complete. In a few more seconds, her virus would be embedded in the station's core systems, ready to execute when the summit broadcast began. "The question is, David, are you going to shoot me in the back, or are you going to help me give humanity a fighting chance?" For several heartbeats, the only sound was the hum of quantum processors. Then David lowered his weapon. "You always were the better strategist." The upload completed just as Commander Chen and her security team burst into the chamber. Keiko turned to face them, her hands raised in surrender, the molecular restructuring device still connected to the core console. "Colonel Keiko Washington," Chen said, "by the authority of the Terran Defense Corps, you're under arrest for treason, desertion, and conspiracy against humanity." "Actually," Keiko replied, "I prefer to think of it as insurance. Tomorrow, when the hegemony tried to deliver humanity's death sentence, they would discover that some ghosts were very hard to kill, and sometimes the best way to haunt your enemies was to let them think they'd already won.